Borderlands 4 is set to release here very soon, and yes, again, there is 4 distinct characters with massively different playstyles, from a melee brawler to a CC-controlled team utility. I'm going to go over each and every single character, their playstyles, their lore and abilities, skill trees, and even a bit extra fun facts. That way we can break down each and you can decide which one you want to pick and why, as I break down each and every character as in depth as possible. What's up, World of Utopia here, back in with another video. Today we're checking out all things Borderlands 4. Okay, so yes, as I mentioned, we have each and every single character here. I'm going to go over everything we know about the characters so far, using a ton of different resources. And yes, that does include their lore and personality, as well as a few other interesting and extra facts about them. So first up on our character list, we have Amon. Now this is a melee brawler and tank hybrid. There's a few other extra details we'll get with Amon, but for his lore and personality section here, he is a cult survivor, only one left when the Vault monsters basically took out his people. His mission was to hunt and eliminate Vault monsters, basically saying the world is a prison. He has this sort of warrior poetic vibe to him, where he is grim in battle, but he's also warm at the campfire, meaning he isn't just full of grit. He does have one little interesting fun fact about him. He loves pistachio ice cream. I actually never tried it, curious on what you guys think of pistachio ice cream. But yeah, that is one of his little lore details and personality. As I mentioned, Amon is a melee brawler tank hybrid, so we do have to break down his abilities here. Now this will include his skill tree, but we'll go over these details as we go one by one. So first off, he has a trait here called Forge Skill. This is a bonus attack that is tied to his action skills, so essentially anything that he's casting or using. It essentially acts like a second ability layered on top of each other, akin to a bonus attack. Now his first ability here is called Onslaught, and yes, all of his abilities technically here, or at least under his action skills, are considered Forge skills. So Onslaught, being a Forge skill, does the Molten Hammer Slam, which is AoE and fire damage, and again is basically that second ability layered on top of each other with the Forge skill. He also has another ability here called Scourge, and that is essentially a firewall barrier that blocks enemy fire and buffs allies that are shot. Now again, it's not exactly a firewall that you might see in other games. This is akin to a normal shield, but is essentially a fire barrier there. But this does allow for some good team compatibility there. He also has an ability called Crucible, that is again a Forge skill. All these are Forge skills. This is a dual axe ability, Fire and Frost. He can throw them and then recall them back, basically a boomerang blast. He can also merge the axes into a spinning boomerang that will explode through enemies, meaning that every skill has both a main cast and an alt fire Forge skill, essentially doubling his versatility there with that. And you will see this skill essentially does boomerang around to enemies, does significant amount of damage. Now his skill tree does apply to each ability here, so technically Onslaught is considered Calamity, Scourge is considered Vengeance, and Crucible is considered Cybernetics. So do keep that in mind for this next section here. Calamity is essentially a melee brawler, debuff, and lifesteal section of the skill tree, again honing in with that Onslaught. This is so he can stack weakness debuffs on enemies, letting you execute them at low health and even target and heal. The Vengeance category of the skill tree does apply to Scourge. That's where he'll help his tanking, cryo counters, and even a taunt. He can essentially build his Vengeance meter while blocking, and then counter strikes will consume it for a huge cryo blast. That's kind of how they go in tandem with that part of the skill tree. For the Cybernetics section, this is drones and forged weapons that has axe, hammer, and sword variants. Where he has something really cool here with Cybernetics, he can augment, summon floating forged weapons, and essentially does have drones here as well that will auto attack alongside Amon. So he does have a bit of a summon ability here, whereas the cybernetic side of the tree will help him spec more into that. That one does tie alongside his Crucible trait ability the best. Now a bit of an extra fact here with Amon, he is actually the biggest Vault Hunter they've ever created, essentially akin to a sci-fi Viking fantasy. We have seen some much larger Vault Hunters like Brick, but this guy even tops that one. He's also physically one of the strongest characters in this series ever. So some pretty cool facts there if you did want to play a nice melee tank that also does have a bit of hybridness to him. He can even summon and buff his allies, also being able to taunt or spec into that at least more. So yeah, this guy has a ton of team utility there and will be really good and probably essential for a team. Moving on here, next we have Harlowe. She has a crowd control and team utility plus nuke, where she actually does have a lot of damage, you'll see here in a minute. First off though, we'll go over her lore and personality. She is from the infamous Trot family, or known as Mollywin. However, she is a bit of an outcast here for loving science, not just war. She's bright, upbeat, and loves discovery and new tech. That does bring us on to what tech does she have? Well, first off, for her abilities here, she has something called Entanglement, where she can spread damage among linked foes. Now, damage linking isn't just a passive here. It actually scales with weapons and her action skill damage, essentially spreading her status effects, meaning one frozen, irradiated enemy will multiply the damage across the whole group. So actually quite strong there. It also seems like it might scale quite highly with this. Now, of course, she does have some skills here to tie it all together. First off, she has Flux Generator. That is a cryo field, and it can actually overshield your allies. Now, this ability, of course, by the sounds of it, is support focused. Again, being able to overshield your allies, strip resistance, and prolong entanglement durations. So this ability here is directly feeding into her entanglement trait. She next up here does have one called Chroma Accelerator. Now, Chroma is actually an orb damage that gets stored and will essentially refund into her guns, which does count as bonus radiation damage. And this essentially does feed into the burst DPS tree. We will go over to the tree stuff here in a bit. The Chroma Accelerator though is an orb that will detonate in radiation, and it does have some really cool tricks here with cue ball bounce upgrades, and can even pull enemies into it. So you'll see it's bouncing around here, especially when she does that upgrade. It does seem like this is going to be one of her main abilities here, as this is also stacking into her gun damage and being able to spread that status effect. Now, next up here, she does have one called 0 Point. This will suspend enemy in stasis, where then they will be slammed for AoE damage, but in her tree, she also does have healing burst options with this. Now, this stasis bubble can chain to multiple targets, kind of just like her Chroma ability that bounces around, where you can upgrade that for AoE slam, explosions, and even life-stealing focused when freezing. So she does have some great team utility here, some crowd control, and even her nuke ability, the Chroma Accelerator. But again, that wouldn't be all unless we tied it into her skill tree, where for this character, she actually does have separate skill trees for each ability. Some of them did apply for all of them, like Amon. However, this one here, like Creative Blast, this one does tie directly into her Chroma Accelerator, where she can increase her radiation damage and have higher orb nuking. The other section of the skill tree here is Seize the Day. That will help her with single target CC, status change, and even healing. That one does apply directly into her 0 Point, which was her CC ability. And then last but not least here, we have the Cosmic Brilliance that does tie into the Flux Generator, where again, she's speccing into support overshield and even her Entangle trait, AoE CC chains as well. And Flux Generator here for her team utility isn't just a defense. Standing in it will boost team DPS by entangling enemies inside and amplifying elemental procs. So all of that tying in together, she is a very elemental heavy Vault Hunter. As with all these Vault Hunters, she does have a bit of extras here. She is an ex-Mollywin scientist, again, but she did become a bit of an outcast. She now does build her gadgets though for resistance, and she does fill the support CC role, but can also deliver a one-button nuke, as we did see with the Chroma Accelerator. Next up here, we do have Rafa. He is considered an Exo-Soldier with high mobility, DPS, and grenade spam. As with all of our Vault Hunters though, we do have the lore and personality. He was essentially born in microgravity, making him a bit too weak for planets, where essentially TDOR's life frame actually did save him, but later turned to cruel dead frame project. Essentially, they started making zombie soldiers. He's obviously rebelled against that and escaped, and now lives a bit of a YOLO life with his clock ticking. Overall, he is considered charismatic, and he does love explosions, of course. That obviously does tie into his grenade spam, where that actually does lead us onto his abilities. First off though, like the rest of the Vault Hunters, he does have a trait. This one is called Overdrive, where this does allow him to get speed and damage buff on skill uses. However, that does essentially freeze while a skill is active. That essentially means he is built around weaving skills to keep his speed and damage buffs almost permanent. Essentially, time will freeze when he's on overdrive while a skill is active. So in order for him to keep overdrive up and loop it, he's going to have to weave in a lot of his skills. So people that are very good with timing abilities are going to have a great time on this class. Now, of course, that also plays into his abilities here. He has Arc Knives. This allows him to enter a melee stance, mark enemies, and even finish with a Blade Fury burst. Now, the essential synergy with this is enemies marked by his knives will take amplified damage. His Blade Fury will actually detonate all marked enemies, allowing for some crazy burst potential. So after marking everything, then he can apply that Blade Fury and detonate everybody. That one's pretty insane. His next ability here is called the Peacebreaker Cannon, where he does have a shoulder turret that will auto-fire or even detach as a turret. This does allow him to have some range here as he is a little bit melee focused. Now the cool little tip here is he can actually cancel these early to refund the cooldown, but he can also create a rhythm of constant uptime there. Again, essentially being able to weave in those skill cooldowns, being able to cancel that to be able to refund that cooldown, and then weave in your other abilities, creating that constant rhythm with his overdrive. He does have one last ability here called the Apophis Lance, where it is an arm-mounted railgun with charge shots, and the unused charge shots will actually reduce your cooldown. So again, a little bit more range here that he can utilize, and also even being able to reduce his cooldowns further. And the synergy there will essentially encourage tactical restraint, where you can't just spam that Apophis Lance, and also synergizing back into the overdrive loop, being able to maintain all of these cooldowns and being able to not use as many charges all at once or be a spam player, gonna benefit this guy a ton. Now he does have a skill tree. Each of these will spec into the 3 abilities. The first one here is People Person, which actually does tie into the Apophis Lance. He can get higher crits with ammo sustain and even cooldown loops. That does focus on those resets there and the crit bonuses, as well as having that ammo sustain, so this is considered the DPS tree. He does also have Remote Agent. That one does apply into his Peacebreaker Cannon and has an emphasis on drone turrets shield generation, and even getting the grenade tree here, which gives him more tech ordnance, so he does have some synergy there with his grenade spam. Last up but not least is this year's gimmick. This one actually does apply into his arc knives. Of course, that's going to be a melee-centric build with improving knife finishers and adding elemental variants, while also being able to splash damage or splash scale increase and speed stacking. So again, that kind of encapsulates all into his overdrive loop. There are a few extra mentions here, and actually there's quite a lot. He is essentially built for grenade spam and constant mobility. As I mentioned with his Remote Agent skill tree, you can definitely spec into that synergy. The devs have mentioned he does feel like the flashiest Vault Hunter because of his constant motion and moving around and mobility, and especially, again, to just hit on the overdrive loop and being able to synergize your cooldowns. You'll be able to constantly spam abilities and be able to move around a lot. So anybody that's good at keeping track of things, this is the player probably in Vault Hunter for you. Last up here, but certainly not least, we have Vex. They're considered a Dark Siren with Summoner, Lifesteal, and Kinetic Damage. We'll hit on the kinetic damage part here in a bit. For their lore and personality, they are a retail worker that was pushed too far during a mercenary sale, and that their Siren powers essentially erupted from this. She did essentially eliminate everyone in the store except herself and just walked away while joining the Vault Hunters. She is considered cynical, sarcastic, but secretly cares for underdogs, and she is being described by the devs as the spookiest Siren yet. She's definitely leaning into the dark gothic aesthetic there. Now her trait and ability here is called Phase Covenant. This is an action skill but also leans into melee adopt gun elements. Now unlike the other Sirens, she can actually attune to any element at will. This happens by swapping weapons. That essentially does make her the most flexible Siren ever. Her action skills and even melee adapt to her gun element. So essentially, she's pretty adaptable here, using any element that you want to at will. Now for her abilities here, she does have one main one that people keep talking about, and the devs as well. That is called Phase Familiar. Now Phase Familiar is her pet cat. This thing can teleport AoE, it even has a mode that it can enter in, and it can taunt and heal. So you essentially have a personal tank and even healer with you. She can command them to blink, explode, as I said, taunt, or even enter a high DPS mode. And really cool with this ability, she can actually recast to reposition him instantly. She does actually have some additional summoners here though. This next one is called Dead Ringer, where she can either spawn specters that are ranged or reapers that are melee. These are essentially disposable minions. She can essentially spawn a few of them. A little note and tip here is that each clone actually does inherit your current element, so again, playing into that flexibility there. The Spectre is considered a stationary range clone, but they are glass cannons, whereas the Reaper that is under, again, Dead Ringer is a melee taunter with lifesteal augments. So essentially here, she has 3 different summons. She has the Phase Familiar, which is her cat, and then she has the Dead Ringer action skills that are Spectre and Reaper. So underneath the Dead Ringer one, she has those 2 summons. She has one third ability here. This is called Incarnate. She can actually buff herself with this one. This is considered her ultimate, where it does cause Explosion, Spectral Wings, Eldritch Blast, and even Lifesteal Sustain. So on activation, she can do those AoE bursts. It will grant her then an Eldritch Blast, which she can do a direct attack and full heal from it. She also has this cool one here that damage during her incarnate will reduce the cooldowns. That essentially enables rapid cycling, so she can constantly spam these abilities here and her summons. This does lead into her skill tree, where she first off here has Here Comes Trouble. Again, Trouble is her pet cat, phase familiar. This allows her to empower Trouble, and this is a very pet-focused build with crits, overshields, and even heal synergy. Again, remember, that is just the one summon, the pet cat, that can do things like taunting, blinking around, or even entering a high DPS mode. Her other tree here is called the Fourth Seal. Now this one applies into Dead Ringer, which allows her to do the minion spam for both her Spectres and Reapers. So she is able to spam those clones a bit more, allow her to apply status debuffs and even some ground control with them. She has one last skill tree here called Vexcalation. This allows her to spec into Lifesteal, Kinetic Amplification, and even damage ramps, so that will give her a bit of more ramping sustain. Where again, her specking into Kinetic Amplification actually does amplify all elements, since swapping into any weapon, that does attune her with that element, meaning she does get buffed with that kinetic. Her overall playstyle here with this is a hybrid of a Flak Summoner, also Maya for status CC, or even Maz with lifesteal sustain. So very nice hybrid build here, but allowing her to actually get summons and have some decent DPS. Again, if you're someone that likes minion builds in games, this one might actually be right up your alley. Or if you're even more of a solo player, I could see how this one would tie in with that, especially because her pets here allow her to have a tank, or even let them taunt as well, allowing her to output DPS without any trouble. She does have, again, a bit of an extra here. She is the first ever Siren in a Borderlands game to be able to summon spectral companions. Amon can do so as well, but they aren't really spectral, they're just as weapons. The community so far has been calling her a Necromancer Siren with a kinetic lifesteal spin. And she does have a strong synergy, of course, with the Malowin guns. That allows her to element swap. Again, that should cover it for each and every single character, as we broke down their abilities, their trait usage, their overall synergies, and even their lore and personality, and a few little extra dev mentions. If you enjoyed today's video, like and subscribe, and until the next one, deuces.